Sheralee, well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody and go ahead share your Be Well moment. Then when you're all done, you can pass it back to me and I'll lead us in a stretch.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, hi all. Sheralee Peterson, serve as the Assistant Vice President of Clinical Programs. For those of you that may not be familiar with the clinical programs, our sole purpose is to spread evidence-based best practice across the organization and improve patient outcomes. So there are 9 clinical programs that span the spectrum of adult health, anything from behavioral health to oncology to surgical, our acute and ambulatory medical specialties, cardiovascular, et cetera. So if there's a subspecialty in adult health, you'll find it in the clinical programs. And it's a pleasure to get to lead that team in partnership with the Chief Clinical Programs Officer, who many of you are probably familiar with, and that is Dr. Raj Srivastava. So an amazing, fun team making positive clinical impact like we all are every day. So it's a pleasure to be here. I think, as I thought about what to share today, I thought, gosh, I bet so many people on this call have had the thought process about what it looks like to weigh the balance of work and personal life and how we take care of ourselves through that process. And one thing that I know is true about all of us working in healthcare is that we're driven by focusing on the well-being of others. And even our mission says that, helping people live the healthiest lives possible. And we know at the end of the day that we can only give our best selves when we actually take care of ourselves first. And even though we all know that, and we've heard that said, and we totally agree with it, sometimes it's just still so hard to actually act on that. So for me personally, I have had an interest in wellness my entire adult life. I did an undergraduate degree in dietetics. I'm a PA by background, and then went to business school before this leadership role. And along that whole journey, I've always just enjoyed learning about wellness and how it impacts the way that we show up. And so, not surprisingly, there was a leadership article published. It's a neuroscience leadership article published, and I'll actually put a link to it in the chat here, called the Healthy Mind Platter. And this Healthy Mind Platter looks at the science of what's going on in the brain with certain activities. And they were looking at, gosh, what's the balance of time spent in sleep and activity and connection and exercise, downtime, etc., that's optimal for optimal brain health and subsequently leadership. So if it's okay, I thought I might share my screen just so you can see what I'm talking about here when we say Healthy Mind Platter and what the elements of that include. Would that be okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. And then, like I said, I'll put a link to this article in the chat here in just a minute. But as you look at this, they use the analogy of a plate. And if we sit down to a meal and we have a balanced meal, what does that consist of? And so what's so fun for me, and I think the reason why this article has resonated with me over many, many years, it was published in 2012, is the fact that it ties science to leadership outcomes and wellness. And it's kind of like this perfect trifecta of something I've always been interested in. And I think that when we say leadership, we're all leaders. We're leaders in our families, we're leaders in our communities, and we're leaders at work. We set a tone of the team that we're on based upon how we show up. And when we're taking care of ourselves, we show up the best version of ourselves. And when we're not, we know probably from personal experience, at least I know from personal experience, that it's harder to show up as the best version of yourself when you're not balancing these things. So starting on the left here, sleep is foundational. And I've really recognized this and tried to personally prioritize this over the years. I actually decided to buy an Aura ring. I don't know if you've heard of the Aura ring, but it's a kind of a biometric tracking ring that tracks your sleep quality and your steps and your movement and all kinds of things. And I have been using it as an accountability partner for myself for sleep because it doesn't lie. And it's interesting because if you look at the sleep data, if there's anything that you could do for your health foundationally, it's sleep. It's when our body restores and when it rebuilds and when our brain reconnects and builds those foundational pieces that it needs to continue to optimize itself. And it's interesting because even just a little bit of sleep deprivation can really compromise the way that we show up. And there's a really interesting research study that was published looking at sleep deprivation and comparing it to drug alcohol content levels in people. And that there's a a correlation between sleep deprivation and our brain's function being the equivalent of drunk. And so, again, just cannot emphasize how important sleep is in this whole wellness experience. Next is physical, so just the idea of getting regular physical activity and exercise time. And then next is focus time. This idea in the article is our brains just aren't meant to multitask and function in this way of looking at 300 different things 200 different ways. We just don't, it doesn't optimally function that way. And the article speaks to how important it is just to have focus time. And so one of the focus techniques that I like to use, and many of you have probably heard of, is this Pomodoro technique. A colleague of mine taught me this a while ago. And it's this idea of setting a timer for 25 minutes. You turn off all interruptions and you just focus on your work for 25 minutes. You have a snack or a drink by your side or whatever it is. And then after that 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break unless you're like in the middle of flow and you just know if you leave, it's going to compromise what you're working on. And so they call them Pomodoros. So you could do up to 3 Pomodoros in a row, for example, before they say, okay, you absolutely must take a break. Because after 75 minutes into it, you're actually compromising efficiencies by not giving your body a 5-minute break. So anyway, that's one of my new tricks with focus time. Next is connection. Many of you have heard the scientific literature around loneliness being the new smoking, and that individuals who are not socially connected from a population health standpoint are at significant risk for poor health outcomes. And if you were to talk to a purist in the population health space, they would say that loneliness is a phenomenal risk factor, more so than diabetes and more so than obesity when you look at the statistical impact of loneliness and the lack of social connectedness. And so we are wired to be connected human beings who connect with people and understand the value of relationships and prioritizing those relationships. And so for me, I have 2 young kids. I've got an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old, and it is remarkably different how I feel when I come to work, when I feel like I've spent quality time with them and connected with them and my husband, and that I'm not compromising those relationships in the name of work. And so that has been a big area of emphasis for me in the past few years. And I've had a personal mantra around the idea of presence when I'm actually with friends or family members. How do I remain completely present and just relishing in that moment? I'm not perfect, so please don't walk away with this idea that I've perfected all of these. But if we're not continually trying, the alternative isn't quite as ideal either. Next is this idea of playing. And, as you look at what happens from us from childhood into adulthood, the concept of play almost becomes too accessory. And it's something that is oftentimes dropped off the list of priorities as adults who are very, very busy, particularly those of you who have commitments, many commitments outside of work and inside of work. And the idea of playtime just seems almost too much. But there is, and again, because I have a clinical background, I really love the literature behind what play does to an individual physiologically and emotionally, and so there really is this fantastic data that if we actually play and do something for fun, that our brain is optimized and our physical and emotional health is optimized. So next is downtime. And this is just the idea that it's like a Sunday morning, you've got nowhere to go, nothing to do. You're not trying to meditate. You're not trying to do anything other than it's just downtime. And I think we all can appreciate having moments of this in our life that we're just not meant to go and go and go and go. So incorporating some intentional downtime, but having it be relaxed and authentic. And sometimes I've joked with people after I've learned about the value of this concept of, okay, I'm just going to schedule in my downtime, but it can't be too structured, but you do have to give yourself grace and give yourself some downtime here once in a while. And then the very last one is this concept of time in. And time in is just the idea of mindfulness. So this is a meditative practice or a journaling practice or qigong or yoga or whatever it is, but there is something about focusing on presence and being in a moment with nothing more to do other than to focus on the presence of being in that time and in that space. And because I'm such a researcher in this space and have read so much in this space, one of the things that I'm personally working on is an intentional meditative practice. Individuals who meditate once to twice a day for 10 to 15 minutes have remarkably different life experiences because they practice getting their body into a parasympathetic or the rest and digest mode. And when your body naturally or is practiced in going into that rest and digest or parasympathetic mode, when stressful moments arise, or just when you're in your day to day world, your body just naturally more goes into this parasympathetic or relaxed state subconsciously because you've practiced it consciously, if that makes sense. So, one of my goals in 2025 is to prioritize time around a meditative practice. And this is a tough one, and it's very different for everybody. That the version of incorporating this wellness into everybody's lives is so personal and so different for one another. So, anyway, this is something again that I've been working on and that's been top of mind for me for a number of years. And I I just have to say that kind of the disclaimer around it's not easy and we're not all perfect. And every year I think, okay, I'm going to try something different or do something different. And sometimes it just seems, so hard. But at the end of the day, it's habit change. And when I think about habit change, we know that our brains are not wired for habit change. In fact, they're wired to do the exact same thing, the same way we've done it, the way that we've always done it. And many of you have probably read a book called Atomic Habits or seen it. It's pretty popular by James Clear. And he talks about how if we can just get 1% better every day, that statistically by the end of the year, you'll actually be 37 times better. So 1% better, which seems a little bit less daunting than 100% better tomorrow type of thing, really seems more doable when I chunk it out that way. And then the last thing that I think about that's been, really motivating for me is that if we're not attentive to this and modeling this behavior for our family, for our community, for our colleagues, or for the rising generation, we're only normalizing an unhealthy approach to life. And so I think about how my daughter or my son might watch me, or how a colleague might watch me, and a individual who's constantly stressed and on the hamster wheel and isn't taking care of themselves is a more challenging and an uninspiring person to be around. So I really try to think about how do we model this to normalize the idea of wellness, because it seems like in our society we have really championed the idea of just constantly being on the hamster wheel and just maximizing every minute of every day to get so much done. And at the end of the day, that's actually just hurting our health and hurting what's being normalized as normal when really it's just not normal. So anyway, those are just a few of my thoughts. If you can't tell, I've thought about it a fair amount and have had a number of years of personal research study and trying to make impact for myself and actually my team and family in this way. And really grateful for the opportunity to share it with you. So I'll turn my camera off and look forward to the stretch with you, Rebecca. And like I said, I'll post that article in the chat as well. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you for sharing that with us. Such valuable information. I'm going to switch over to my spotlight. We'll just take a minute to stretch. So if anybody has a 10:30 meeting they need to get to, you can get the code. Let's take a moment and just connect with our breath as we swing our arms over, stretch that full body, and breath out. Full breath in and breath out. One more full breath in. And this time as you breathe out, reach all the way down and touch your toes. Big reach as far as you can get. And then deep breath in, reach up tall and out. Open up your chest this time. Bring your fingertips trying to reach each other in the back. And then bring them close together and round your back the other way. Nice spine stretch. All right, shake it out. Thanks everybody for getting moving for a minute, especially thank you, Sheralee, for sharing such valuable information with us.